Brent, would you like to start us off?
Great. Is everybody here, and are we live now?
We are live.
We're live and recording. Wow. Okay. Okay. Well, welcome everybody to our American Canyon Housing Element Workshop. This is the first in a series, and we're happy to have you here. I'm Brent Cooper, the American Canyon Community Development Director, and I'm very happy to introduce our staff here that will run us through our workshop. We have Nina Bellucci from Rincon Consultants, and Ryan Lester from Mintier Harnish. And from American Canyon, we have William He and Nicole Jones. So we're really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. And I'm going to turn it over to Nina, who is going to explain a little bit about what we're going to do.
Thanks, Brent. I'm going to share my screen to get us going. Are you seeing what I'm seeing?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. Thanks, Brent. I am Nina Bellucci. I am with Rincon Consultants, and joined by Ryan Lester also. So we're going to talk a little bit tonight about the general plan and more specifically about the housing element. And then we will do a little question and answer session and talk about the process for this update of the housing element. So the city is in the process of updating both its general plan and housing element right now. The general plan is a city or county's comprehensive plan for development. Every city and county in California is required to have one, and it has a long-term planning horizon, usually about 20 years. And American Canyon's plan is over 20 years old. General plans don't expire, but they do need to be updated to stay current and to be compliant with new state laws. Chapters of a general plan are called elements. That's why we call it the housing element. They cover topic areas like land use, housing, safety, services. Some elements, in particular housing, have very specific legal requirements. And that's why we're going to spend most of our time tonight talking about the housing element. The housing element is a plan to accommodate housing for the whole community. So at every income level, many types of housing. It's the only general plan element that has to be reviewed by the state of California. The Department of Housing and Community Development is responsible for certifying these documents, and they have to be updated every 8 years. So those 8-year periods are called cycles. This upcoming cycle is the 6th. And many housing grants and funding opportunities also require that a city or county has a certified housing element. So it's very important that cities adopt an element that can be certified. So this graphic is a kind of overview of the sections that go into a housing element. A housing element has to provide an assessment of current and future housing needs in the community. It identifies constraints on housing production and opportunities to increase production. It establishes goals, policies, and programs to address housing needs and constraints. And it updates policies and programs to reflect new state laws that may have been passed in the planning period. Affirmatively furthering fair housing is a new requirement, and this section identifies fair housing issues and develops strategies to address disparities in opportunity in the community. The regional housing needs allocation is the process by which the state and regional governments determine how many new homes each city and county in the state has to plan for. And the state determines the regional need, and then the regional governments distribute that need among the cities and counties. And this table at the right shows American Canyon's RHNA. The total number is 622 homes, and then there's it's broken down by income category from there. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the sections of the housing element, and we have 3 polls that we're going to open up at different times in this discussion that will inform the housing element update. So the needs assessment first looks at demographics and other characteristics of the population and the city's housing stock. And this slide shows some of the key findings from the needs assessment analysis that we've done so far. So demographic trends show that the community is getting older. It also shows that the city is getting more diverse over time, and it is more diverse than the county of Napa as a whole. Income in the city is higher than the rest of Napa County. Some of the issues we identified around jobs and housing are that many people work outside of the city and can have long commutes. The average commute is 40 minutes one way. The city's housing stock is primarily single family homes, and median home prices are lower than in the county on the whole, but many people still spend more than 30% of their income on housing, and that's the typical measure of affordability. So overpayment is still an issue, especially for renters in the city. And the age and condition of homes is important to determine rehabilitation needs in the city. So in American Canyon, a third of the homes are more than 40 years old, which is an age at which you can assume that homes start to need significant repairs. So Nicole, we have our first poll now. I think this one has just 3 questions about the community profile and housing needs, in particular, condition of housing. So I'm going to pause and breathe and wait for the poll to open. Okay, so
I've launched the poll, sorry.
Yeah, I see it. I assume everybody else does too.
So those of you in attendance, if you'd like to start submitting your answers, this is a quick 3-question poll. And we'll just give you a couple minutes. Let's see. I'm going to give you guys a couple more seconds. Answers are coming in.
And these answers will combine with the survey that we put out and demographic data that we collected. These answers will inform the needs assessment part of the housing, excuse me, of the housing element.
Okay. Let's see. I'm going to give it just another second here. I want to make sure everybody has a chance to participate. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the read, and I'll share the results. So,
thank you, and thank you everyone who participated. Okay, so we're gonna, yeah. Thank you, Nicole. Okay, so we're going to talk about the constraints analysis. This is another required component of the housing element. It is essentially an accounting of all the barriers to building housing that may exist in a community. So this is a list of some of the examples and types of constraints that could exist on the economic side. The cost of construction and land can make it difficult to build housing at all or build housing that's lower cost and affordable. Governmental procedures like zoning regulations might not allow the kind of housing that this community needs, or fees and procedures might add costs and delays to the process of building housing. Environmental constraints are usually physical characteristics of a site that might increase the cost of housing or might restrict where housing can be built, like earthquake risk or steep slopes. And infrastructure limitations might make it costly or difficult to build housing where infrastructure is limited and has to be expanded or improved. So we have another poll. This one is a little bit longer, so we may need to give it a few minutes. But we have some questions about constraints and opportunities for housing in American Canyon.
So everybody, you can go ahead and start participating in the poll.
I think also the poll, you can scroll down. I think there's more than 2 questions.
Yeah, there's 5 questions total. So you can scroll. I don't have, well, let me see if I can enlarge it. There we go. But I don't have the ability to show, the screen's not large enough for me to show all the questions all at once. But go ahead. For those of you in the audience, please participate.
I'm seeing Q&As, and I saw the poll disappear from my screen too.
You pulled the, okay, let me see if I can relaunch it. It's asking me to share. Okay, we might be having some technical difficulties here. Let me see if I can relaunch it. Relaunch, here we go.
Yeah, I'm seeing it again.
There we go. Sorry about that, guys.
I'm going to mark those Q&As as answered.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for hanging in there. I don't want to interrupt anybody's answer, but I just do want to reiterate that these questions will help us determine, what kind of housing might be lacking in the community based on public input, and identify any constraints that the public might see to building housing. So thank you for answering and participating.
Give it we've got 71% participation. We'll give it another couple of seconds. I'm just gonna scroll down here a little bit to see. Okay, I'm going to give everybody about 30 more seconds. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end this poll and share the results. So, how satisfied are you with the housing choices currently? Looks like 40% are very satisfied, 60% are somewhat satisfied. And this is with the total participation with the attendees of 71%. Most important housing issue, 60% say lack of options for aging in place. 20% say lack of affordable housing options to buy. And other is 20%. What types of housing are needed in American Canyon? It looks like it's a 40% split between starter homes and ADUs, with micro units and condos and townhouses coming in at 20% apiece, and senior housing coming in at 20% apiece, as well as other. Is housing affordable to rent in American Canyon? 60% agree, 20% disagree, and 20% don't know. Is housing affordable to buy in American Canyon? 60% agree, 60% disagree, 20% agree, and 20% don't know. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Nicole. And thank you everybody who participated. All right, so we've got a little brief, want to talk about the inventory for American Canyon, and then one more poll on this topic too. So the site inventory is the way that the city shows through its housing element that there is enough land in the city to accommodate the units assigned to it. And there's a few ways that a city can do that. So first, you look at the projects that have been approved or applied for but not yet built. And then we look at trends in accessory dwelling unit production in the city. So we determine an average over the past planning period and project that out over the future. And accessory dwelling units are homes that can be built on the same lot as a single family home, typically smaller and easier to build, cheaper to build. They can provide housing for family members, or it can be a rental. It's a sort of flexible space that can accommodate additional units on existing housing and existing lots with housing. So if there's still unmet need after looking at those two factors, then a city would have to identify additional sites that can accommodate new housing. And our initial findings show that the city's RHNA can be met by projects in the pipeline. Those projects are mostly in the Watson Ranch and Broadway specific plan areas. But we do still need to look at accessory dwelling unit production and project that out. So we have a few questions on that topic specifically for you. So like I said, they can provide additional housing where housing already exists. And we just wanna ask a few questions to see what the barriers to building those units might be, or how interested the community is in building those units.
Are you ready for me to launch that, Nina?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. All right. So this is our third and final poll. It's just 2 questions. There we go. People are starting to participate. We have about 71% participation. I'm going to give it another few minutes or a few seconds.
Okay.
And actually, I think we can go ahead and end the poll.
Okay.
Okay, I will share the results. So this was just 2 questions. How interested would you be in building an ADU or small secondary unit? 60% said not at all interested, 20% slightly interested, 20% moderately interested. If you own your home and you're interested in building an ADU, what has kept you from doing so? And 60% said that they think it would be too expensive. 20% said they're not at all interested, and 20% said that they're not the property owner.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. Thank you, audience. That will be helpful in determining, what the city can do to encourage building ADUs. So with the remaining time that we have, we want to open it up for questions or comments. If you have questions, you can ask those using the question and answer feature in Zoom. And if you have comments, there's an e-comment feature on the city's website. And I know that you cannot click on that link in Zoom. So I'm going to see if I can put a link in the chat.
You can also click on that link through the city's website on the agenda. And if you are in the audience and you'd like to raise your hand, I can unmute you to speak. The one person who is dialed in, if you press *9, you can raise your hand.
Here's a little graphic of where to find the raise hand button.
So
I'll stop sharing my screen for the moment. And Ryan and Brent and I are available to answer any questions that you have.
So if you are in the audience and you would like to ask a question, please go ahead and raise your hand. You can also type your questions in the Q&A.
I'll put it out there to the group since no one's raising their hand quickly. For those who said they're not at all interested in building an ADU, do you want to share your thoughts on that? Why you felt that was the answer for you? Maybe.
Okay. We also do have a hand raised right now from Scott. Scott, I'm going to unmute you.
Okay. Hello. Yes, I was just going to respond to Ryan's question about the ADU. And for me, and say my wife, the problem with that is what is the potential or what happens with the resources that we currently have, such as street parking, additional noise factors, increase in population on the, just the streets or the roadways and commutes. It's already, say, a challenge to sometimes even get to be able to pull your car out in front of your own house just on the weekend to do some work. So, or to move stuff in your driveway or move your car around, having additional units on your house could potentially make that impossible to do. Or even just, so as a homeowner, that's something that traditionally was available, but becomes more and more hard to just get space or noise reduction. And I'm also curious about, as I put in the chat, what are the ultimate goals for the city? Is it to expand? Are we trying to maintain the small town atmosphere that drew myself and my wife to American Canyon? The proverbial Mayberry-esque opportunity that we have here. And because I think understanding what the goals of the city, and more importantly, what the goals of the members of the community are, that helps determine what actually should be thought about in terms of housing, because if the goal of the community is to stay small, then that can, then that means, are we going to be in, wanting to have more apartments or more houses in general, because we don't necessarily want to expand or lose the open spaces that we have as a great resource for members here in the community.
Well, thank you for your comments. I really appreciate your comments on some of the constraints with ADUs and thinking about building ADUs. I can say, as far as the housing element and goals, a big part of what we're doing in the 6th cycle is not only continuing the city's goals that they set in place with the previous housing element, but also reacting to state law. So like with ADUs, the city doesn't have the opportunity to just outright ban them, right?
That's correct.
The state says you can't do that. So a lot of what we're doing in the 6th cycle is reacting to both the state identified need. So we're not in the housing element, we don't actually propose any production. We're just making sure that there's enough land zoned correctly to meet the state identified need, right? And then beyond that, we're looking at constraints in the community, but also constraints identified by the state and reacting to those and saying the city complies or the city doesn't comply. And if they don't comply, then we have to make a program. So in the 6th cycle, I know it's probably not as inspiring as people want it to be. But yeah, a lot of it is driven by state law compliance, because the state is really pushing for cities and counties to go a little further to reduce constraints and to encourage production. But when it comes to like the city's lower income goals, the city is just zoning for land that can provide a density that meets the state requirement for that. It's not, the city is not proposing actual production. The realities of development come through as applications come through, just like normal. But we do have to make sure we're providing enough land for houses and units to exist.
Yeah, that makes sense from that perspective. But I guess for me too, yeah, if I guess then so we're essentially trying to weigh in on the option then of what the city would say approve in the future then, essentially, because or am I missing something then?
Yeah, no, you're on the right track. So we're looking, the state's identified goal looks out 8 years. So those are the units that we have to plan for in this 8-year cycle, right? But with the City of American Canyon, because the whole arena is being provided by projects that are already in the pipeline, we're not proposing any, like we're going to rezone single family or up zones. We don't, the city is strategically in a place where they don't need to do those things. And I can tell you in cities and counties all over the state, they're having to upzone and rezone because they're just down to infill properties, and they're having a much more challenging process. American Canyon, because you have so many units in the pipeline, you get to choose. You have more options, and just the pipeline projects are satisfying the arena. So we don't need to propose increased density in existing neighborhoods.
Got it. Okay, I see.
And Scott, if I could maybe add on to, I think Ryan did a great job explaining a lot of the housing element purposes and the way in which it works. But I think at a very global level, you've raised a kind of the whole governance issue. Whether we're talking about housing or anything else, there's a lot of laws, there's a lot of competing interests, there's a lot of different ways of accomplishing goals, and what the state requires, and this is just baked into the way we do things. And I'm glad to see that Jen Kanzenbeck has joined us. She's our outreach manager. The way in which good governance happens is we're able to balance all these different competing interests and demands. And by doing so, by reaching out and getting feedback from residents on how you sort of eye the needle to be able to meet all of these different things. One of the consequences for not having a good housing plan, given that we are imposed upon, as is every other jurisdiction, California, a housing requirement. If cities aren't able to approve development and meet its housing goals, there are state laws that say, city, you lose your authority to even have public hearings and have discretion over development standards on new development. So we have to be very mindful in the way in which we find a way to accomplish the state goals. And if we don't, the state will take them away from us. And I don't think any of us want that to happen.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Yeah, and I guess that was kind of my step back was, you're right, kind of the global thing is looking at, yeah, what are the ultimate goals of the city and the residents, but also trying to understand how that interplays with obviously the state and requirements. And so I think for me, having some of that perspective can help inform also what kind of responses do we want, or, you know, is it versus ADUs, for instance, versus how many other apartment complexes do we want to come in here versus what kind of strain is that going to put on Highway 29? When do we want to, how much do we want to expand that and create additional road noise right through the heart of American Canyon, or disrupt the incredible views that we have on, you know, the site on the mountains versus the wetlands here. And so for me, it is kind of a global perspective first, and then understanding what that is, then these other components fall into place. So yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting interplay and consequences, both good and bad. But be happy to talk to you sometime too about development review and the ways in which we go about reviewing things and some of our requirements and standards to help make the city better as it grows.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions or comments? We have several people in the audience, a few who have joined a little bit late, but please jump in with questions and comments.
If I could maybe kind of pose a question to the group, I do recall that housing cost was a concern. And there again is maybe, you know, that sort of tension between how much housing do you build? You know, we all know, you know, the supply and demand. If you constrain supply with the demand, the prices go up. So if housing is a concern and the cost of it, from that perspective, are there any thoughts from the group on what might be a good approach to be able to help address that?
Yeah, so I can say to get us started, one of the best ways is to just generally try to reduce costs on developers, of particularly in multifamily, but just reducing cost to developers in general. We look at fees, city fees. We look at processes. So your discretionary review process, we have to report what's the process? What are the findings required to deny a project, or you know, what kind of conditions are being put on projects? And then HCD wants to tell you if it's a constraint or not. So one of the ways that we can reduce costs for developers is by having a program in the housing element to commit the city to adopt like objective design standards if they don't have it. So objective design standards would be, you go through a process that looks at your design guidelines and your typical discretionary review, conditions of approval, and what you want from design, and puts it in specific language so that developers can have that. They can have some assurances that if they meet all these objective standards in this checklist, that they'll be approved without being put through a discretionary process. So that's one way that cities and counties are exploring reducing costs is by allowing, some cities allow single family and multifamily projects to be approved through objective design standards. And that's just from the notion of, if we reduce time for developers, if we reduce discretion and make the application process quicker, we can save money for developers and reduce the cost of housing. So that would be one example of how cities and counties are approaching that.
So we do have 2 hands raised. Scott raised his hand first, so I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself again, Scott.
Yeah, great question. So for me, I think as Ryan was saying, it has to be some kind of local fees and processes, because no matter what happens outside of the local area here, there's always going to be incredible price pressure, especially in the North Bay or even the Greater Bay Area, that's going to affect housing, whether or not, so no matter almost what we do here, there's always going to be a price affected by that. And just in California in general, as housing prices are soaring across the state. And so for me, I'm not really sure how much can be done locally or hyper locally here that will continue to reduce the incredible jump in housing prices that we're seeing. And I don't know if there's an answer to that, or maybe this is more of a comment at this point.
Scott, if I could just maybe make a brief comment. There's a variety of policies that in total help to alleviate cost pressures. I think you're referring to the market overall, and you're absolutely right. In my opinion, it's hard to stem a tide, but there we'll say, variety of best practices. Ryan mentioned one of them being objective design standards. And HCD is going to be looking to make sure that our housing element includes those best practices, so that even though the tide of the market may be rising, we're still doing everything we can to help keep costs at a minimum to the extent that we have control over that.
Yeah. So I think that makes sense for sure. And but there's some things that I don't think that we would potentially want to lose or skip out on, such as possible, say, mitigation or something like that for threatened and endangered species, or just the open space opportunities that we want to have. And maybe that's a way to, to ensure that we have more open space, or preserving the open space that we do have by using mitigation measures. So offsetting the costs that are going to come from these other local fees, processes, and stuff might be helpful.
Exactly. And as we said, it's all a balancing act in governance. So you're absolutely right.
Thank you.
We have Tammy Wong. Tammy, please unmute yourself. Tammy, are you there?
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, we can
Yes.
hear you now.
Oh, thank you for taking my question. I guess one general comment, I don't know if it's the city's capability, but I always have a hard time hearing these meetings on my cell phone when I just zoom in on my cell phone app. Maybe I can talk with you offline about that, because for other Zoom sessions I've been on my phone, I haven't had an issue. But really my comment for this would be, whenever I think about housing, I always think about traffic. And traffic is the question, I think, that is a top concern for so many residents. So is the housing element a place where traffic calming is considered, or is there a different place where that's a factor? And I apologize if this isn't the place to ask this question.
No, that's a great question, actually. We in the presentation, we talked about a little bit about the general plan and the housing element being an element of that. Typically, traffic and circulation is housed within a separate element, sometimes called mobility or circulation. And that's where policies regarding traffic would end up. But we are currently doing a general plan update. So, we'd love to take your comments. So if you do have comments on things like that, I wrote down what you said, but also make sure to submit them through the website, because we'll make sure that those get to the general plan team as well.
Okay, so traffic calming is part of, you said, the mobility or circulation element, not specifically the housing element.
Right, traffic, any traffic related, circulation, mobility related issues are dealt with in a separate element. Yeah, if we were doing major rezones as part of the housing element, we would have to go through a secret process, and we would have to analyze that. But as we said before, we're not proposing any of that. We don't need to, because all of our sites are in current projects.
Okay. Well,
And Tammy, if I could maybe just add on to a little bit. Typically, the general plan, of course, having all these elements, they aren't necessarily all just distinct topics unto themselves. They all have equal weight under the law, and there's a lot of cross-referencing that will happen. And a lot of times in the general plan, what you'll see are policies in one element, and then it's cross-referenced to another one. And so I can't give you an example of where traffic calming might be specifically a housing one, although I imagine if I had a little more time, I might think of that. But the moment I'm not. But I guess the point is that you could very well see potentially traffic or other policies that you might find in other elements cross-referenced into the housing element. And that's to help ensure internal consistency, to make sure that everything is being looked at holistically.
I'll get the hang of it. I think this is just the first of many workshops to come. But I do like what someone else said earlier about maintaining our open space, because I think that's something that we appreciate so much here in American Canyon. And I was wondering, I agree with what was said earlier. I'm not saying we want to, try to zone out no housing, but I'm wondering how do we balance preserving our open space with having more housing, more affordable housing, or somehow trying to have more densely affordable housing? So I think that was one of the questions in the poll, was that the people who, most of the jobs in American Canyon, they don't pay enough to buy a house here, or maybe even to rent here. So how do we have housing that you can afford on whatever the average salary is of most jobs in American Canyon? How do you find that balance?
I think, Tammy, maybe you were referring to housing and open space. And I could talk for a long time about that, but I won't. But I will say that housing and open space really goes together much like peanut butter and jelly. It's critically important for people who live in a place to have recreational opportunities, and open space is incredibly important. The studies show this, how important that is for health, mental well-being, a host of positive benefits. And so we do have a parks component to the general plan. We do have fees that help pay for parks. The city has an urban limit line so that beyond that, what remains open will stay open. There's a host of policies that do support open space, but at a very broad level, it's very important to have even maybe necessarily small places, but recreation and open space is critically important for livability of a community.
Absolutely. And just to reassure everyone, as part of the housing element, we're not suggesting that any open space land be rezoned for residential uses.
Okay, that is very reassuring. But I am still curious though how we can build housing that is affordable for, I guess, the majority of the people who may work in our city on the salaries that they have. Is there a way? How do we line that up? Is that even possible?
The role of the city in the housing element is to try to identify areas where we have an opportunity to remove a barrier or to incentivize production. And those are directly because of costs, right? The cost is a main driver of those, trying to keep costs down. But also the state in how they require you to plan for your lower income units. They let you use, and they actually require you to use a density standard, right? So in rural areas, if you want to plan for those lower income units, you have to provide land zone at 15 dwelling units an acre, or that allows 15 dwelling units an acre. For a city like American Canyon, it's 20. And then for a major metropolitan area, it's 30. So that's a standard that the state has set to say, you know, in your size of jurisdiction, affordability starts to become more realistic when we get to a little higher density, right? It's not saying that it's going to happen. It's not saying that even affordable housing will be built on that land. We're just providing the space for it to happen if the reality of development comes to fruition, right? So long story short, by adding density and trying to remove barriers, we can try to limit costs for developers and limit total cost in the end. That's part of the goal.
Okay, thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions or comments? We'd love your participation. Okay, Scott has raised his hand again. Scott, please unmute yourself.
Thanks for the conversation so far. And I was just thinking about some of the outside or the local processes and fees again, and not sure how much, say, the city of American Canyon would have on other outside pressures that are being talked about in the state, such as, say, tolls on Highway 37. If we're talking that a lot of people are commuting, then how much sway does the city have with a local highway that maybe a lot of the residents are commuting each day? And that just creates added pressure on a monthly budget that is also, that could play a factor in affordability with houses. And so there's other things like that, but I'm not sure this is the forum, but yeah, what is available to the city, or how much sway do they have in limiting something like that happening?
Hi, Scott. I'm not quite sure your question. Were you referring to tolls on Highway 37?
Yeah, just because I think as we're talking about outside housing pressures and making things affordable, when the state is asking or wanting a city to comply with certain regulations, but then going forward with, or at least contemplating adding tolls and increasing tolls on, say, future of Highway 37 or others that lead into American Canyon, or a lot of the residents are commuting with, that just, it seems to be counterintuitive if they want affordable housing and availability to happen, but then they're adding daily charges to some to residents' budgets. And so I think it's just, again, it's kind of a global perspective of what the state is requiring and how much say does the city, or how much sway could the city have in saying, hey, that this is going to hurt our potential for providing affordable housing if we're going to be then demanding tolls for people who are commuting to work, when we just saw the statistics that was provided about how many people actually work in American Canyon and how many don't.
It's a very interesting comment. I don't know the answer to it, but I think it's a great comment.
Yeah, that was all. Thanks.
Okay, Chris James has his hand raised. Chris, can you go ahead and unmute yourself, please? Hi, Chris. Are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
My microphone was actually unplugged and I don't know why. Sorry about that. Yeah, what I'm hearing off a few people and I guess from the panelists as well is is around traffic. And I know this is housing, and there's a lot of concern in the community about traffic and safety and such. And I did participate in the traffic element, but it was very focused on one specific thing, which was the West Side Connector. And I'm curious if maybe, and again, I'm not expecting a proper reply or a full reply tonight, but I'm curious if we are going to circle back around and look at traffic as a whole, the circulation element beyond just the West Side Connector, and coming back and doing what you're doing here now with the general community, so that they can have input into the general plan. And I liked what Scott was saying about tolls. There was a toll increase on the bridges coming in the south of us. And a lot of that money didn't go toward our roads. Most of the money that was allocated to projects in the South Bay, on the peninsula. And we have problems on 37, and we're now going to be taxed on that road potentially, because they want us to pay for our own road with what we're using, but we're getting taxed on the already bridges that we're getting. So again, is this a political comment more than trying to get you to answer it or address it? But I think this still needs to be fed back, and the more houses we add, it's going to be a problem. So it'd be nice to have a forum for the circulation element, for the general public to give input and have discussion about it, because it's a hot topic. That the city knows that. So I'm hoping we can circle back around on it. Thanks.
I have had a request. Jen Kanzenbach has been texting me. She's having some communication issues, but she's watching. Just so that everybody knows, there is a traffic calming workshop on May 19th at the Boys and Girls Club, and it is listed in the community community calendar. So that would be.
But it's not about for the general plan update, right? I'm saying there was an element, there was an update, an official part of the process was to have, but that's a separate thing. And I did see that on the website, and I appreciate you bringing that up. But I'm talking about the circulation element of the general plan. I think needs to be addressed by the whole city, or the chance for the whole city to give input into it. So, I guess in summary, will there be a public workshop on the circulation element?
Chris, yes, we're working on the overall general plan. The housing element has its own time frame and approval process through HCD, but we are updating constantly the general plan. So there'll be meetings on the circulation element. Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Are there any other questions, comments? Once again, we invite and encourage your participation. Tammy has raised her hand again. Tammy, could you please unmute yourself?
Hello again. I don't know if this is a proper question per se for the housing element, but I've heard there are, I guess, businesses, and I guess maybe this is more a zoning question. So if I'm totally off base asking it here, just let me know. But I guess there are companies now that are buying up houses, and then they're renting out the houses like timeshares in residential neighborhoods. Is that allowed in our zoning and something that would be covered in our housing element?
Tammy, that's a great question. Timeshare use of single family and a home, maybe we have single families, is not permitted in most zoning districts in the city. There are a few places where it is allowed, but where if it's a residential district in Vintage Ranch or Le Vignier, it needs a use permit. But we've only had one application, and it was submitted right around COVID, and the application was withdrawn. But that kind of use for housing at this time is not permitted.
Okay, thank you.
Additional questions, comments? Please raise your hand. Again, for the call-in person, if you press *9, that'll let me know that you want to speak. We want to give everybody an opportunity to participate. Nobody is raising their hand at this point.
I did want to give just a few of the next steps, and I can do that now while we kind of, give people one last chance to raise their hand if they want to. So there's a survey open right now that we encourage everybody to take. It'll be open until May 13th. And we'll be having another workshop in a couple of weeks. Is it a couple?
Yes, it is on the April 27th. So it's again on a Wednesday at 6 p.m. And we will publish an agenda just like we did for this one.
And that'll be virtual also.
Correct.
We'll be, yeah, right.
Where can we find the survey?
Oh, it's the website is here. I'll share the screen just so everybody can also see the dates. So the website is amcan2040.org, and you can see you can find a link to the survey there, and that's where all news and updates will be. So yeah, workshop will be getting deeper into affirmatively furthering fair housing issues in the next workshop. We anticipate a draft ready for review in June. Planning Commission and City Council will hold study sessions in July. And then it's expected that the Planning Commission and City Council will review a draft potentially for adoption at the beginning of 2023. So again, that website is down there at the bottom. We've got also some contact information for Nicole, our gracious host, and the website again here. So that's, I don't see any other hands.
We do have a couple of written questions. Clarice, I'm sorry, you asked for your email to be addressed. I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself, and would you mind verbalizing your comment? I don't have your email handy, although I did send it. And Tammy, in answer to your question, it's a different meeting on the 27th, so different subject matter, but well, different topics covered within the same housing element, correct, Nina?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll be talking about fair housing issues and affirmatively furthering fair housing. So things like disparities in access to jobs, housing, amenities throughout the city or the region.
And let's see. Clarice?
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for the wealth of information. So my question doesn't really have much to do with the housing. Well, it does have something to do with the housing, but I'm a new signing agent, and my question had a lot to do with that. So that's why I asked for Nicole or Ron Lester email address.
So Nina, would you mind sharing my email again on the screen?
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
So yeah, there's Nicole's
It's
address.
just a really long email address, so.
Okay. All right, pretty fast.
While Nina's doing that, I will say
Sorry.
it's njones@cityofamericancanyon.org.
Okay.
I hit one button and I forgot to hit the other button.
Got it.
Okay.
Meanwhile, any other questions, comments? So the one comment we received via e-comment, I'm just going to put this out here. This was put on the website and it is available for anyone who wants to read it through the e-comment section of the website. It was, let's see, it says, how can we continue to add any kind of housing when we have, let's see, wait, I'm sorry. When we have water source, when we have no sustainable city water source, and which creates higher prices, which are out of control now in American Canyon.
Nina, did you want to try to take that one?
Sure. It's a tough one. I think every city in the state is dealing with this challenge right now. Unfortunately, as Ryan said, we alluded to it during the presentation, the choice as to whether to accommodate the new units that the state has, or that the regional government has assigned the city, is not really a choice. Again, it doesn't mean that the city has to build those units, and it doesn't say what kind of units have to be built. So cities can do a lot to reduce water use in new buildings, but the state, the demand for housing grows whether any city or county wants it or not. So, whether it gets built is not really is not part of the housing element process, but whether it can be built by rules and regulations is. And I will take over.
Thank you, Nina. Also, I think we're all very much aware of the dire water condition in the state and in the North Bay, American Canyon specifically. American Canyon for many years has been working on improving its water reliability. One of the main ways in which that's happened is something called the Zero Water Footprint Policy. The city has a policy where new development, whether it's housing or anything else, there needs to be conservation or new water sources elsewhere in the system. And so that by improving water conservation primarily, we're able to grow without increasing our potable water demand. Examples of how that works, we have some new apartments in town where the toilets are plumbed with recycled water. We also have leak detection to reduce waste. There's also new development will provide pipelines in some cases so that some of our parks that are irrigated with potable water can be turned over to being irrigated with recycled water. So there's a variety of ways in which our Public Works Department works overtime to find different ways to conserve water so that new development doesn't add new demands onto our potable water system.
Okay, so that was the only e-comment we received thus far. Any additional questions, comments?
And I'll just reiterate that the ways to provide input now are the survey and then the next workshop, but there will be an opportunity to comment on the draft. So if you are signed up for updates, email updates, you'll be notified when the draft is released. And then there's those two study sessions in July where you can also hear discussion among decision makers and submit your own comments.
So it doesn't look like we have additional comments or questions at this point.
Okay.
I want to thank all of you for taking time away from your busy schedules to join us today. It's really gratifying to see you come and listen. Hopefully, you're able to learn something from us, and in turn, with your comments too, you're helping to educate us as well. So I really appreciate that. And I don't know if Nina or Ryan has any concluding comments as well.
I just wanted to thank everyone. You know, I know we're throwing a lot of information at you, and I appreciate you sticking with us. Among the comments, you know, one of the comments I felt like I heard was that, you know, costs are not just high for developers, but that the cost of living is high and that we should consider that in the housing element. We hear you. So thank you for your comments today.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Shall we?
I guess it's good night. And we'll see you at our next workshop and others to come.
Yes, April 27th, right?
Yeah.
April 27th, 6 p.m.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Night, everyone.